General Manager Candidates. The Las Vegas Raiders have officially begun their search for a new general manager, starting the process to fill Tom Telesco's position. Today, we're going to focus on two candidates the Raiders have reached out to, one of whom is already scheduled for an interview. That candidate is John Spytek, the assistant general manager for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's set to interview with the Raiders sometime next week, and he's definitely someone to keep an eye on. Let's take a closer look at his background and why he's such a strong contender. John Spytek has an impressive resume. He's been working in the NFL for years, starting with the Detroit Lions and then moving on to the Philadelphia Eagles. He also spent time overseeing college scouting for the Cleveland Browns before moving to Tampa Bay, where he's played a key role in their player personnel department. His experience across different teams and roles makes him a standout candidate for the Raiders' GM position. In short, Spytek's long career in the NFL, especially his work with player personnel, shows he's more than ready for this opportunity. Why the Buccaneers won the Super Bowl. John Spytek played a major role in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' Super Bowl victory just a couple of years ago. If you're not familiar with the differences between a director of college scouting and a director of player personnel, here's a quick breakdown. The director of college scouting primarily focuses on college players for the NFL draft, while the director of player personnel is responsible for current NFL players and upcoming free agents. Spytek, who worked as the director of player personnel for the Bucs, was instrumental in bringing Tom Brady to Tampa Bay from the New England Patriots. In fact, Spytek's a former teammate of Brady, which likely helped him form a connection and convince Brady to join the team. This move played a huge role in the Bucs' Super Bowl win. What's also notable is that the Buccaneers, even before Brady arrived, were always a strong team, especially on defense. While they didn't always win, they were consistently competitive. The arrival of Brady, along with Spytek's work in building the roster, was the final piece that turned the team into Super Bowl champions. Given his deep experience and success with the Buccaneers, Spytek is a very strong candidate for the Raiders' GM role. Many successful NFL general managers have worked their way up, gaining knowledge and experience over time. Spytek is one of those people who's ready to take the next step. John Spytek and other GM candidates. In this case, John Spytek may have the chance to become the Raiders' next general manager. There have been some conflicting reports about whether he's already had an interview or if this will be his second one. Some sources say he's already met with the Raiders, but I haven't seen confirmation from others to back that up, so it seems more likely this is his first interview. Regardless, Spytek remains a fascinating candidate. However, there's another person I personally find a bit more intriguing, though it's not a knock against Spytek. That person is John Eric Sullivan, the Vice President of Player Personnel for the Green Bay Packers. According to Adam Schefter, the Raiders have requested an interview with Sullivan for their vacant GM position. Now, this is just a request for an interview, not a scheduled one, and not an indication of any upcoming interviews. But it's still significant that the Raiders are showing interest. What's interesting about Sullivan is that, unlike some other candidates, he hasn't been around the NFL as long. He's spent most of his career with the Green Bay Packers, but in that time, he's gained a lot of experience. John Eric Sullivan's background. John Eric Sullivan comes from a football family. His father, Jerry Sullivan, was a longtime NFL and college coach. Although Jerry retired a few years ago, his influence clearly shaped John's path in the football world. John's journey started in 2001 as a student assistant at Gardner-Webb, and he even coached wide receivers for a time. After that, he transitioned into scouting, covering the Central Plains and Southeast regions for about 8 years. Eventually, Sullivan made the leap to the NFL, where he spent 2 years as a director of college scouting. From there, his career continued to rise. In 2022, he was promoted to Vice President of Player Personnel after 4 years serving as co-director of player personnel. His experience across both college scouting and player personnel has given him a well-rounded view of the game, making him a strong candidate for a GM position. It's interesting to note how many people in this line of work start in college scouting and eventually move into player personnel. It's a natural progression that leads to roles like general manager. And it makes sense, too. A GM's success is often built on the relationships they have with current NFL players, whether through drafting or bringing in free agents. Sullivan's experience in both areas could make him a perfect fit for that role. The challenges of contract negotiations. When it comes to managing NFL teams, one of the toughest challenges is contract negotiations. It's not just about drafting players like Max Crosby or Malcolm Kuntz. It's also about keeping them around when their contracts expire. Negotiating new deals and making sure players are happy is a whole different ballgame, and it's a crucial part of being a successful general manager. The Raiders' GM candidates, John Spytek and John Eric Sullivan, will have to deal with these very challenges. Both have experience in managing player rosters, but this part of the job requires finesse. Retaining key players isn't always as easy as it seems. It's also worth noting that under former GM Tom Telesco, the Raiders didn't extend a lot of contracts for players in the final year of their deals. For example, Marcus Epps and Robert Spillane were both entering the last year of their contracts, but Telesco didn't give them extensions. In fact, I don't believe Telesco offered any extensions this year at all. Whether that was a strategic decision or a choice made by Mark Davis, we don't know. Perhaps the team was waiting until after the season to start negotiating, or maybe Telesco simply chose not to make those moves. Regardless, whoever takes over as the Raiders' GM will have to make those tough decisions, and doing so effectively could make or break their success. Building a new team. When a new general manager takes over, it's common for them to want to bring in their own players and reshape the team according to their vision. They may not be as focused on keeping players who were already on the roster, especially if those players don't fit into their plan for the future. This might mean a fresh start, with some familiar faces being replaced by new ones. Over the next couple of weeks, the Raiders will hire a general manager, and soon after, a new head coach. These decisions will have a big impact on the direction the team takes. What's also important to note is that many of the current Raiders free agents won't be around next year. This situation will be similar to when Tom Telesco came in. Players like Amik Robertson and Josh Jacobs, as well as a few others, were allowed to walk because Telesco didn't draft them and felt they didn't fit his vision for the team. The new GM, whether it's Spytek, Sullivan, or someone else, will likely approach things in a similar way. They might look at players like Adam Butler and decide he's not worth the money, or they might choose not to bring back Marcus Epps and Robert Spillane because they don't fit the new direction. This means that, just like with Telesco, some players will likely be released or not re-signed as part of the rebuilding process. Retaining key players. It will be interesting to see which players are kept and which ones are let go. One of the most important factors in building a team that can compete for a Super Bowl is keeping the talent you draft. A great example of this is Nate Hobbs. Hobbs is one of the best slot cornerbacks in the NFL. People often overlook the difference between a slot corner and an outside corner. It's like comparing a nose tackle to a three-tech defensive tackle. They have different responsibilities and play different roles. Hobbs excels in coverage, is a strong tackler, and plays the run well, which is crucial for a slot corner. Given his consistency and growth, Hobbs is the kind of player you want to keep. He was a mid-round pick. I'm not 100% sure whether it was the 4th round, but I believe it was somewhere around there. And since then, he's improved every year. Heading into next season, which will be his 5th year in the NFL, Hobbs has a lot of good football ahead of him. He's a guy you want to lock in for the next 3 to 4 years. Other players like Trayvon Mullen are also key pieces. Mullen has played a lot of snaps for the Raiders and shown he can be a solid contributor. Both Mullen and Hobbs fit well into Patrick Graham's system, and retaining these younger players who still have their best years ahead of them is crucial. On the other hand, guys like Robert Spillane and Marcus Epps, while solid, might not be as central to the team's future. I wouldn't be upset if the Raiders brought them back, but if they're let go, it wouldn't be a huge surprise either. The influence of Tom Brady and next steps. If the Raiders decide to let players like Spillane and Epps walk, I wouldn't be too upset. I get that whoever the new general manager is will want to build the team in their own way. The same goes for the new head coach or defensive coordinator. If they're a defensive-minded coach, they'll likely have their own vision for how things should be run. That said, it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. The Raiders have already started interviewing candidates, and I'm sure over the next few days, we'll hear about more names in the mix for the GM position. One key thing to remember is the influence Tom Brady is having on these decisions. Brady's presence is making a big impact on the direction the Raiders might take, not just in terms of the general manager, but also in choosing the next head coach. I talked about this in yesterday's video, so if you haven't seen it yet, be sure to check it out. We discussed how Tom Brady's influence is shaping the future of the team. What do you guys think? Are there any candidates, whether for GM or head coach, that you think the Raiders should consider that they haven't looked at yet?